one move on the entire league?
Well, you're seeing guys flock to want to play for the Lakers, and I promise there are conversations happening right now, not only with free agents, but guys who are on teams who may want to actually get traded to the Lakers because they see potentially something that's going to be very interesting. And Zubin, having been through the Heatles in Miami and seeing how that was an incredible and crazy operation, having been through the first year that Cleveland got LeBron back and that whole passive-aggressive social media fit in, fit out with Kevin Love, I can only imagine what this is going to be. We still don't even have any idea what this full team is going to look like. And we're already getting the opportunity to have an idea of the craziness. And one thing I will say here is, though, the Lakers have some basketball decisions they've got to make. While everybody's going on and on about Lance Stephenson, and I agree that we'll have moments of levity for sure, moments that will also frustrate LeBron. They're going to need some three-point shooters at some point. Lance Stephenson I think he shot 29% on three this last year. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who they also added, is a decent three-point shooter, shot 38% this last season. They need some outside shooting. When you have LeBron on the court, you need to spread the floor. And Julius Randle, a guy who they may bring back, is not a long-range shooter either. So they're also going to have to do some other deals that are beyond just the free agents they have, potentially to add some shooting to this roster, because you got to have shooters around LeBron James.
No question about it. So we've seen LeBron and Lance Stephenson on the screen in graphical form. We're looking at the breaking news. Why not have them share the screen in their most famous moment, or shall I say infamous moment ever? We'll get to that in a second. I think a lot of people know it. Remember this? Lance with the Pacers, blowing in the ear, the king, looking like he's not even... Oh, no, LeBron's chuckling. He knows it, shaking his head. Thank goodness this guy's not on my team. Oh, actually, wait a minute. They are now together again. So you said it, Brian, that he would be somewhat frustrated. It's pretty obvious. You got LeBron's face there. It's pretty obvious that he would be frustrated. Just kind of take me inside the dynamic, because I think one of the great things about great players, Brian, is they can make players of all ilks, all talents, all backgrounds work with them. So just kind of take me inside what you think this might be like.
Well, Zubin, let's just add some perspective here. LeBron was just playing for a team with a guy who lost track of the score in a finals game. So he is used to a little bit of challenges sometimes on the court. They played against each other in 5 playoff series. They have a long history of playing against each other, and I have to tell you, the 7-game series that the Pacers played against the Cavs this year was a classic. And there was some incredible LeBron-Lance moments, both in going Lance's way and going LeBron's way. But LeBron has never been a guy to hold a grudge. We know this because he went back to Cleveland. If you can help him win, he will accept you. Last year, actually it was 2 years ago, Lance Stephenson was coming off of an injury. He was a free agent, and the Cavs worked him out and considered signing him. They wouldn't have done that if they didn't have LeBron's opinion that he wanted to play with them. So I think it's comical, but LeBron obviously respects his talent, respects his game. I don't know if he's going to respect his decision-making at all times, Zubin, because that gets a little shaky, as anybody who's ever played with him will tell you. But it's an interesting pickup. It's an interesting usage of the Lakers' room mid-level exception, which is what they're doing here at $4.5 million. I got to think the Lakers have some other plans that are still unfolding that we're going to see. It's fascinating, though, but again, it goes along with the Lakers' plan to only add players on one-year contracts. As they've gone out and talked to teams and talked to free agents tonight, they've been stressing that. And the reason is, if they can't trade for Kawhi Leonard, they want to have salary cap space to sign him next year. And so the 2 deals they've given out, other than LeBron's tonight, to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and to now Lance Stephenson, both 1-year contracts. And it'll be interesting to see if Julius Randle, a guy they have a restricted free agency status with, if they try to sign him to a 1-year contract and whether he'd be amenable to it. There's not a lot of space out there for him to sign with another team. So the Lakers are probably working the phones very, very hard right now as they go to assemble this roster.
No question. It is a moment of levity, but you do bring up a very good point, which essentially is you got to look at it and say there's no way they'd bring Lance on if LeBron wasn't okay with it. And
I must say something else, Zubin.
Yeah.
I must say something else. And I just want to know, I'm just calculating all this in real time here. I wish I had all this put together.
Yeah.
it's not unreasonable to think that the Lakers would be able to use Luol Deng. This is a guy who they've been dreaming of getting rid of for a year, and they may end up having to waive him and stretch him and be able to use his salary cap space, and that may be what they do. But as I think about how this team's coming together, Luol Deng kind of fits. Now, he doesn't shoot well from the outside, but he is a two-way player. He hasn't played in a year. I'd kind of be interested if Luol Deng could help him. So these are all things that are on the board right now.
No question about it. We're going to talk a little bit more about Luol Deng as I'm going to head over, Brian, thank you very much, with our Bobby Marks. So one thing I want to mention here is when you look at Luol Deng, what Brian's talking about is the stretch provision. He's got a 2-year deal, but the Lakers get rid of him. They could parse that salary over the course of 5 years, save him some money, give him some more money in the short term. Bobby spent 20 years inside NBA front offices. So let's get back to the real top story of Lance Stevenson now joining LeBron James. Who cares about LeBron to the Lakers? Now, tell me how this works financially with these two guys in the fold.
Well, right now you're at $47.6 million in cap space. That includes Luol Deng's $18 million contract. We are not going to use the stretch provision on him. We're going to leave him on the roster right now. As Brian said, maybe we can get something out of him this year. We still have the Julius Randle $12.4 million cap hold. You can exceed the cap and bring back Randle if you'd like. But as Brian mentioned, they are only targeting 1-year deal. So is that a $20 million contract? Would Randle do that? Unlikely.
Okay.
So when we slide James in here,
well, that's got to feel good for Laker fans, seeing that right there.
That gets you to $12.8 million. So that is your available room right now. We have Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. We had him projected at $9 million, so we got a nice $3 million bump.
Right. Now, that officially happened today, right?
That happened about right after the LeBron James announcement. That came right after. So when we slide KCP in there, that gets you to $1.7 million in room. And what the Lakers did, they had the room mid-level exception available. And you can use that exception to exceed the cap. So Lance Stevenson comes in.
Here we go. This will be a swipe for the ages, Bobby. Do this one right. Here we go.
We had him at $1.5 million. So Lance got a nice $3 million bump. We slide Lance in, and there you are. You can exceed the cap. We see it's $2 million, but because you use that room mid-level, this is your Laker roster. And what that does is that eliminates DeMarcus Cousins from the conversation.
So he's out at this time.
He is out of the conversation unless you renounce the Julius Randle hold, 12.5, and you stretch Luol Deng. Probably unlikely right now, and who knows what Cousins is looking for. I don't see him taking a 1-year, $20 million contract right now.
Okay, just take me inside real quick as we take a look at these numbers. You spent 20 years inside front offices. Just from what's happening on a minute-to-minute basis, you've been on phones back in the day, BlackBerry, I'm sure, right? You were doing this right back in the old days. What is it like right now inside the Lakers' War Room Brain Trust?
Well, they've had this orchestrated. This is what they were planning for. They were planning for a LeBron James, and basically, if you couldn't get Paul George or Chris Paul, what are some of the side pieces? What are the 1-year guys who are going to come? I talked to Mark Bartelstein, the agent for Lance Stevenson, right before I got on, and he said it was a 1-year contract. This is what the Lakers are offering right now, 1-year contracts, and he felt that Lance would be a good fit, especially reuniting with LeBron James, two players who battled against each other for a while. But this is where they are. Zubin, the interesting part is this is going to make a Kawhi Leonard type trade extremely difficult. I won't say unlikely, but very difficult, because the Deng contract is not tradable unless you are going to move probably 2 first-round picks. The Randle contract, he can't be traded unless he agrees. It's a sign and trade. Now you're looking at Lonzo Ball, Kyle Kuzma, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, to try to get the money where Kawhi Leonard is. He's making $20 million. To get that to close to $17 million is very hard to do unless you want to clear the deck and trade all your young players right now. And that's even if the Spurs would even take those players back.
It's a very salient point that Bobby makes. You got to think about this. Stephen A. Smith was on earlier, and he essentially said the Lakers are putting sort of an unofficial drawing a line in the sand. We're going to go on this Monday. We're going to work on Kawhi Tuesday. If not, we're moving on to somebody else. He's still in play, but as Bobby says, it's going to be extremely difficult to bring the SoCal kid from Riverside back home. Bobby, thank you so much. Let's take a look at the odds of this particular juncture as the Lakers are currently constituted at 7-2. So think about that. The Rockets nearly dethroned the Warriors without Chris Paul, and the Lakers with one move have zoomed past them. As Rachel said, the Lakers-Celtics rivalry now back in full bloom, both at 7-2. But what's most important at this very juncture, the Warriors can't be shaking in their boots. Vegas has them as a ridiculously overwhelming 10-11 to win the title. But as Bobby said, the Lakers may not be done. Amazing. Look at the Cavs down there at 500-1. They need a telescope to see LeBron and company at this point. Let's bring back in our Dave McMenamin. Okay, so we're at 500-1. Literally nowhere to go but up. I know you've been on your phone all day in your apartment. So what are the Cavs thinking now that this is done from an emotional standpoint, and now it's just time to put the blinders on and move ahead? What's the plan?
Well, I think, first of all, the Cavs better get their heads together and do something to acknowledge that this news has happened. You go to Cavs Twitter, nothing.
Nothing?
Cavs Instagram, nothing. No, and this is something now I'm starting to hear from fans on my social media saying, hey, what gives? Are the Cavs not allowed to do this? Is it the moratorium period? No. And so, the news has been out several hours. I understand the shocking nature of it. But, I think at some point, you mentioned earlier on the show, ESPN put together a super highlight cut of all LeBron's best highlights. Cavs should do the same thing. I think at some point you have to acknowledge what they were able to accomplish together the last 4 years between Dan Gilbert and LeBron James coming back together, putting aside their differences. The quote that LeBron's camp likes to use, progress over pride, and doing kind of the unthinkable. If you took it back 8 years ago, no one would have thought that we would have this scenario where both LeBron saying that he has a great working relationship with Dan Gilbert and Dan Gilbert calling LeBron James a partner. Whether that was lip service or not, they were able to exist together for 4 years and do something that's quite memorable in the city of Cleveland. So I would expect some sort of public acknowledgement. And then, again, they have already put the wheels in motion to be a team without LeBron James. Last year, they signed Jetty Osman instead of Jamal Crawford, trying to invest in their future. Obviously, when they traded Kyrie Irving, they had to make sure they could get a young asset out of that deal. They got Colin Sexton. They believe the point guard of their future, someone who wants to be in Cleveland, someone who they think is among the best competitors that were there in the draft this year, even though he was number 8. And then they have guys like Rodney Hood, who they expect to be able to re-sign as a free agent. Of course, Larry Nance Jr. and Jordan Clarkson, the guys that really freed up the cap space for LeBron to go to L.A. by the Cavs trading for them mid-season. And a guy like Ante Zizic. I know I've spoken to Tyronn Lue tonight. He expressed a degree of shock about the news, but he is certainly excited about the chance to coach these young guys and be a part of their development, because he remembers when he came into the league just trying to scratch and claw his way as a bench player for the Los Angeles Lakers, and the coaches and the veterans who helped him have an 11-year NBA career. He wants to be one of those coaches for the young guys that he has now in his toe.
Listen, I know you communicate with Dan Gilbert, and I've got to ask you this in light of what you just said about the Cavs not putting anything out. He famously or infamously said when LeBron left to go to Miami, don't worry, we'll win a title before he does. I don't think that really worked out well for him. So in this case, with the sort of strain that they've always had and no response, no acknowledgement, what do you think Gilbert's state is right now?
I can't say that he would be, I guess, like kind of blindsided by this, because, again, the organization has made their moves ever since last summer, anticipating something like this happening. I would imagine he also learned by the backlash, not only to his public reputation for what he did in 2010, but to the bottom line. He's a businessman who wanted to do business with someone who was making the price of his fatheads, in reference to Benedict Arnold's birthday, if you remember back then.
Yes.
So I don't imagine any sort of extreme reaction. Certainly people grow over time, and it was a fruitful pairing while they were together. And now they move on to the next phases of their life. And Stephen A. Smith has reported in the last week or so, Dan Gilbert has told some people throughout the league that I'd like to get my team back.
Wow.
Well, It's going to be back, Dan. So, here's a big challenge for you to tackle.
Be careful what you wish for, having your team back there, Mr. Gilbert. That's our Dave McMenamin, and obviously when we get any reaction from the Cavs, if it comes, we'll have it for you here first on SportsCenter. Time for some closing thoughts with three of our most respected voices, Michael Wilbon, Brian Windhorst, and our Rachel Nichols. Rachel, let's begin with you. It has been a seismic shift, in the words of Woj, a seismic night in the NBA. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's also a seismic night for LeBron James. He is basically choosing sort of to go into this next phase of his career. There will be a time, Zubin, LeBron James is not the best player in the NBA anymore, right? And he has had this amazing run, these 8 finals in a row. It's possible if he stayed in Cleveland, the choice of when he got down from that perch would be made for him in the East. Instead, he is choosing how he is going to shift into a different phase of his career. It is less likely, right, than likely that he will be in the finals again this coming year, unless the Lakers pull off maybe a trade for Kawhi and another piece somewhere down the road. But he is walking into it himself. He's making the choice, and I think that's important. But also, we all have to adjust to the fact that we are going to see LeBron not just in another uniform with another name across his chest, but kind of taking another place in the NBA pantheon. We'll have to see how he does in this Western Conference, adjusting to the competition, adjusting to the travel, and adjusting to maybe not being the king the same way he's been used to, but making the choice to do it himself.
Rachel with a great point. Every final since 2011 has involved LeBron. Will next year be the end? Brian Windhorst is here as well. Brian, your closing thoughts tonight on a day for the ages in the NBA.
Well, the first thing I want to do is say something to Cleveland, and I know that most people, Cavs fans, are probably not watching this right now. They probably can't stand it, but the 2016 championship was an incredible moment in the history of the city. It's going to be an incredible moment for the future of the city, and I think that they should take this moment to appreciate how special that was and to let it last, to let it grow. Don't just put it behind you, to embrace it and remember it and treasure it. And what I would say about LeBron, from Cleveland to Miami to Cleveland and now to Los Angeles, it has been an absolutely incredible ride, one of the greatest stories and one of the greatest journeys we've ever seen in the history of the NBA. He has entertained us. He has created controversy. He has done so many things that have kept the league relevant and interesting and grow the league. He's probably worth $1 billion to the league. Wow. He has delivered on so many different things for so long. And the last phase of his career, which is probably what this is going to be, is another opportunity to do that. And so I say to the average NBA fan, embrace this moment, embrace another chapter in LeBron James' career, and prepare yourself for another few years where it's going to be an absolutely incredible, wonderful story that we watch unfold.
Well said from a man that knows Ohio himself. Another Midwesterner, as he proudly said, is Michael Wilbon. We're going to get your closing thoughts. And I know somebody once said, head west, young man, and that's where you want to focus. Mike, take us home.
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about the imbalance. It's not just an imbalance now. It is completely out of whack, the talent and the teams you have in the Western Conference versus what you've got in the East. And we've heard Adam Silver speak favorably in recent months about the 1 through 16 seeding possibility. Well, great players don't just change one city or a couple of franchises. They change the landscape in general of entire sports. And this could be the tipping point. The league now has to look very seriously at the 1 through 16 possibility, because why would you reward 8 Eastern Conference teams? There are not 8 Eastern Conference teams that deserve to be rewarded when you've got teams out there that are going to struggle in the West just to make the playoffs. And you've got teams coming up who are going to be in discussion like the Suns, who can't possibly get into the playoffs this year at all, but are still of more interest than the teams in the East. So 1 through 16, the time seems to be now. I wonder if this is the tipping point, but there's so many elements to LeBron's announcement tonight that this is just one of very, very many.
It comes on July 1, and it is the #1 story in sports. That is our Michael Wilbon joining us tonight to give his perspective on a story many saw coming and is now official. LeBron is a Laker. So what can we expect right out of the gate? Win increase from the previous season. When you add a guy like LeBron, you saw what happened with the Cavs in his rookie year, plus 18, changed everything, exceeded the hype. Then he went to the Heat. They started out 9-8. It got a little rough with Eric Spoelstra. The next thing you know, they win 2 finals. They're in the finals every single year. He pens in Sports Illustrated he's coming back. They're plus 20 a couple years after he comes back. They win the first franchise championship. Incredible. Take a look at this tweet from Zlatan Ibrahimovic, the member of Los Angeles' preeminent soccer team. And Zlatan has never been one to be humble, but even he has to bow down to the king. Now LA has a god and a king. Zlatan welcomes King James. Interesting. Very, very interesting. I want to quickly mention one thing before we go tonight. Scott Van Pelt's going to be up with much more reaction on this after Sunday Night Baseball between the Red Sox and the Yankees. There was a seminal moment, if you were watching the NBA Finals, I know like millions of you were. With 4:03 to go in game number 4 and the series out of reach, Ty Lue called over and said, let's go. This is the moment. And remember, he had the broken right hand. Why is he dapping up everybody with his left hand? It's because a whiteboard was on the other end of it after game 1, after J.R. Smith's faux pas. And this was the moment. There's his wife, Savannah, his 3 kids. He's evolved. He's become a father. He's evolved as a player. And in his 15th year in the NBA, he continues to be amazing. The iconic pose in Cleveland, the shoulders out. He shouldered and carried the franchise for 11 years in 2 stints. Now he shoulders the burden of Magic, Kareem, Kobe, Worthy, Jerry West, and the Lakers. Thanks for joining us. Much more coverage on Sunday Night Baseball with Scott Van Pelt tonight on